Ford, the automaker announcing that it will be unveiling the all-electric F-150. It'll happen right now. To find somebody who has paid maybe $60,000 or $65,000 for a very high-end pickup truck, well, even the average pickup truck now is going to be crossing over that $50,000 barrier.
What if your brand new Ford V8 was secretly burning itself alive? Owners expected strength. Instead, their trucks are chugging oil like gas, and Ford calls it within spec. But that missing quart isn't just an inconvenience. It's a warning sign that your engine and your wallet could run dry. Why are so many engines failing early? Why is Ford denying it's a defect? And how much longer before regulators step in? Stick around, because what's happening under your hood could cost more than you think. What's happening? You do not expect to babysit a brand new truck with a jug of oil-riding shotgun. But that is exactly what Ford's 5.0 V8 owners found themselves doing, topping up quarts like clockwork, even before the first loan payment cleared. These engines, sold as modern muscle, were burning through oil so quickly it felt like trying to hold water in a cracked glass. At first, drivers doubted themselves. Maybe it was a bad fill at the dealer. Maybe the dipstick was off. But then the pattern spread. Forums lit up with identical stories. A quart gone every 1,000 miles, sometimes more. Truck beds that should have carried lumber or tools now carried oil containers because without constant top-offs, the heart of the F-Series would run dry. Ford's official line, within specification. That phrase became the punchline to a cruel joke. Imagine paying over $40,000 for a truck marketed as indestructible, only to be told by a service desk that losing oil at that rate was perfectly normal. Owners did not buy excuses. They bought trucks, and every mile driven with a watchful eye on the gauge chipped away at trust. This was not just inconvenience. This was the kind of flaw that rewrites reputations, the kind that turns legends into liabilities. And just when owners thought the oil was the only problem, their engines began talking back, with a sound no one could ignore. The tick that talks. From the moment cold weather set in, many Ford owners heard a distinct metallic chatter. It was not a faint rattle or a normal hum. It was sharp, rhythmic, and unmistakable. In garages and driveways, the 5.0 developed what drivers called the typewriter tick. The sound would appear after startup, sometimes lasting minutes, other times persisting for the entire drive. To mechanics, it hinted at valve train irregularities or oil starvation. To Ford's official communications, however, it was labeled a normal characteristic. The gap between what owners experienced and what Ford described created a gulf of mistrust. Imagine paying more than $40,000 for a brand new truck, only to have the service desk tell you the noise in your engine was not a problem. Some drivers accepted the explanation, but many could not shake the anxiety. A truck that ticks like a worn-out typewriter does not inspire confidence when towing livestock, hauling equipment, or carrying children on the interstate. Online communities turned the tick into a symbol of corporate dismissal. The phrase, "they all do that," spread like wildfire, used sarcastically to describe how Ford downplayed concerns. Trust once eroded is hard to rebuild, and the tick was not just sound, but signal, a warning that deeper flaws might lurk within. And as Ford loyalists wrestled with that suspicion, another engine, bigger, newer, and supposedly bulletproof, began to show cracks of its own. If this hits close to home, hit the like button right now and drop a comment with your thoughts or experiences, because the more voices we gather, the harder this truth is to bury. Godzilla's growing pains. The 7.3-liter V8, nicknamed Godzilla, was introduced with fanfare. It was supposed to be Ford's answer for heavy-duty trucks, a massive gas engine designed to haul, tow, and endure. Early reviews praised its torque, simplicity, and departure from complex turbocharged systems. For a brief moment, Ford seemed to have reclaimed the throne of durability. But soon, troubling reports filtered through owner groups and service base. Some mechanics shared borescope images of cylinders with visible scoring at low mileage. Others documented oil consumption reminiscent of the smaller 5.0, raising fears that even this giant was not immune to design flaws. Camshaft chatter and machining variance rumors swirled, fueled by anecdotal accounts from drivers who felt vibration under load or heard abnormal noises. The very engine marketed as indestructible began to look vulnerable. For the heavy-duty crowd, contractors, ranchers, municipal fleets, this was more than a nuisance. Reliability is livelihood. A truck sidelined by unexpected repairs can cost contracts, delay projects, or leave livestock stranded. The thought that Ford's newest gas powerhouse might share the sins of its smaller sibling sent ripples of alarm through communities that once saw Ford as the gold standard. And with both the 5.0 and the 7.3 facing questions, owners realized that complaining online would never be enough. They needed leverage. That leverage would not come from the service desk or customer hotlines. It would come from the courts. Dipstick to docket. At first, complaints about oil loss and engine noise were scattered. A driver in Texas might post about adding a quart every week, while a contractor in Michigan might upload a video of his truck ticking like an old typewriter. But isolation gave way to coordination. By 2022, owners were comparing notes in organized spreadsheets, logging VIN numbers, mileage, consumption rates, and dealer responses. What began as frustration evolved into evidence. Law firms took notice. Attorneys specializing in automotive defects saw the pattern and began filing class actions on behalf of affected owners. The language was stark. Ford knowingly sold trucks with engines that consumed abnormal amounts of oil, failed to disclose the defect, and dismissed complaints with service bulletins that described symptoms as normal. Plaintiffs argued that these engines were unsafe, prone to premature failure, and diminished in value the moment the key was turned. For owners, joining a lawsuit was not just about money. It was about forcing accountability from a company that had defined itself on strength and endurance. The dipstick became a legal exhibit, the oil log a sworn statement, and the courtroom the new battleground. What started in garages and forums was now entering the legal system, promising discovery, depositions, and documents that could reveal what Ford knew and when. And this was only the beginning. As cases moved forward, Ford's strategy of silence and minimization would collide with public scrutiny, and the scandal that started in service bays was about to erupt onto the national stage. Service messages as shields. When owners first brought their trucks in for inspection, they expected Ford to treat the problems with urgency. Instead, many were met with a piece of paper, a service message or bulletin that described their complaint as a normal characteristic. These communications, often couched in technical language, became shields for the company. A tick, a knock, or even oil consumption that left owners filling quarts between changes could be reframed as within operating parameters. To Ford, it was a controlled narrative. To drivers, it was corporate gaslighting. Dealership technicians had little choice but to follow the bulletins. If an official service message stated that the typewriter tick required no repair, then the dealer's hands were tied, warranty claims were rejected, and frustrated owners left with the sinking feeling that their expensive trucks were being minimized by paperwork. Even loyal mechanics who had worked with Ford for decades admitted that the bulletins created a wall between what they saw in the shop and what they could tell a customer. This strategy insulated Ford from immediate financial exposure, but it also hardened resentment. The service message may have protected warranty budgets in the short term, but it cost the company credibility. Owners could accept a mechanical flaw. What they could not accept was being told it did not exist. And when Ford finally moved to address oil problems directly, the fix would spark outrage of a different kind. Thicker oil, thinner wallets. The official solution came not as redesigned hardware or extended coverage, but as a simple instruction: change the oil. Instead of the originally specified 0W20, Ford directed service centers to use 0W40. Caps were swapped, manuals updated, and a new narrative presented. Thicker oil would reduce wear and extend longevity. On paper, it sounded like a straightforward preventive measure. On the road, it became an expensive compromise. Drivers soon noticed that the thicker oil affected performance and fuel economy. Trucks that once delivered 18 miles per gallon now dropped to 15, a seemingly small change that multiplied over 100,000 miles meant thousands of extra dollars spent at the pump. The frustration grew when resale markets began flagging vehicles with the updated oil specifications. Buyers asked why a late-model truck needed thicker oil, and dealerships quietly admitted that it raised concerns about long-term reliability. The fix did not repair misaligned crankshafts or scarred bearings. What it did was push failures farther down the road, often beyond the 5-year or 60,000-mile warranty. For Ford, that meant fewer immediate claims. For owners, it meant higher fuel bills, diminished resale value, and lingering suspicion. The oil gambit protected balance sheets but drained wallets. And as drivers counted every lost mile per gallon, mechanics began opening engines and showing that the problems went deeper than lubrication. Metal doesn't lie. Inside the block, The story looked very different from the tidy explanations offered in bulletins. Mechanics tearing down failed engines found evidence that no oil change could disguise. Cam journals showed wear inconsistent with advertised durability. Tolerances between crankshaft and bearing surfaces suggested machining variances that allowed abnormal movement under heavy load. Small amounts of debris left in galleries from factory production created scoring that multiplied under stress. These were not quirks, they were flaws written into the metal itself. Owners who paid for detailed inspections received photos of scored cylinders, worn bearings, and shavings in oil pans. These images traveled quickly through forums and social media, undermining Ford's claims of normal operation. Even technicians loyal to the brand admitted privately that what they saw did not match what the company instructed them to say. No service message could erase gouges on a bearing surface. The deeper the inspections went, the more the evidence piled up. Mechanical reality resisted narrative spin, and the contradiction between what Ford told customers and what metal revealed became impossible to ignore. The question shifted from whether engines were flawed to whether Ford had delayed acknowledgement, and that shift caught the attention not only of owners and mechanics, but of regulators who had seen this pattern before. Watchdogs awaken. Regulators watch for patterns, and by 2025, the pattern around Ford's V8 engines had grown too visible to overlook. Complaints logged with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration showed clusters of failures, while class actions drew national headlines. Lawmakers began asking why a problem that had appeared in forums years earlier had not triggered earlier intervention. The echoes of past automotive scandals hung in the air. Congress remembered ignition switches that led to fatalities, airbag inflators that exploded, and diesel engines that cheated emissions tests. In each case, delayed transparency worsened the damage. Ford's oil and noise issues may not have claimed lives, but the risk of sudden stalling on highways was real enough to alarm safety boards. Committees on Commerce and Transportation quietly requested documents, engineering memos, and warranty data. For Ford, the political danger was clear. Silence that once seemed like a shield was now being reframed as a strategy of concealment. Regulators armed with subpoena power threatened to unearth internal discussions that could prove damning. And as watchdogs moved in, Ford faced a crossroads: continue to insist the problems were minor, or concede that the scandal was larger than first admitted. Either way, the spin cycle was over. What came next would no longer be controlled by service messages or oil caps, but by courts and Congress. Trade-in trauma. For many Ford owners, the problems did not stop under the hood. They followed into the resale market, where trust is currency. Carfax reports began to note warranty repairs and oil consumption checks, while some service centers even affixed stickers indicating updated oil specifications. What should have been routine maintenance history turned into a scarlet letter. Buyers scrolling through listings saw the notations and immediately questioned long-term durability. Dealers, too, became cautious. Trucks brought in on trade were suddenly valued thousands less than expected, with sales managers citing consumer reluctance to take on a known problem child. Owners who had financed $40,000 trucks found themselves upside down on loans, trapped in vehicles that had lost value overnight. The pride of ownership that once came with a gleaming F-Series quickly morphed into anxiety about negative equity and financial loss. Online communities filled with stories of deals falling apart when prospective buyers discovered recall ties or service notes. Even those willing to accept a discount worried about catastrophic failure down the road. In markets where Ford trucks had always commanded top dollar, value slipped 10 to 15% in under a year. The damage was not theoretical. It was written into loan balances and monthly payments. And for those who depended on their trucks for work, the pain was magnified even further when downtime entered the equation. Fleets on the brink. A family may suffer from one stranded truck, but a business can be crippled by several. Contractors, landscapers, delivery services, and even municipalities discovered that downtime was more than inconvenience. It was economic hemorrhage. Each truck off the road meant missed appointments, delayed projects, and strained contracts. For a contractor running a fleet of 10 vehicles, a single engine failure could trigger cascading costs, rental expenses, overtime for remaining staff, and even lost bids when reliability came into question. Municipalities reported similar headaches. City departments that had standardized on Ford heavy-duty trucks faced backlogs when units were stuck waiting for inspections or replacement engines. Essential services like snow removal or road repair stalled as maintenance shops waited weeks for parts. The result was not just angry customers, but frustrated taxpayers. who saw public dollars wasted on trucks that could not do the job they were bought to perform. Even small businesses faced devastating ripple effects. A delivery company with 3 trucks could survive one breakdown, but 2 or 3 in quick succession became existential threats. Customers do not care about technical service bulletins. They care about deliveries arriving on time. Reliability had always been the reason businesses invested in fleets of Ford V8s. Now, that very selling point was undermined. As fleets faltered, the complaints shifted from consumer forums to legal filings, where groups of owners began turning frustration into lawsuits that aimed to force accountability. From forums to federal court, the journey from scattered online posts to coordinated lawsuits followed a familiar trajectory. At first, owners swapped photos of oil-soaked spark plugs and screenshots of dealership invoices. Then came spreadsheets cataloging VINs, mileage, and oil consumption rates. Finally, attorneys stepped in, recognizing that individual grievances could be welded into collective legal pressure. By 2022, class action lawsuits had been filed in multiple states, accusing Ford of concealing defects and shifting costs onto consumers. The legal filings painted a stark picture. Plaintiffs argued that Ford's 5.0 V8 engines consumed abnormal amounts of oil, that the 7.3 Godzilla showed premature wear, and that Ford had failed to disclose the extent of the problems. The lawsuits alleged breach of warranty, deceptive trade practices, and unjust enrichment. Discovery demands sought internal engineering reports, warranty reserve data, and communications that might show what Ford knew and when it knew it. The scale of litigation was not trivial. A single successful class action could expose Ford to hundreds of millions of dollars in damages and compel costly remedies such as extended warranties or buybacks. The company now faced a dilemma: settle quickly to limit exposure, or fight in court and risk damaging revelations. Either path carried risk, but the lawsuits ensured the controversy could no longer be dismissed as isolated complaints. And just as the courtroom battle heated up, another arena prepared to weigh in: Washington. Capitol's crosshairs? Congress had seen this movie before, and lawmakers recognized the early scenes. In past decades, ignition switches, airbag inflators, and emissions cheats all began as technical problems dismissed by corporate statements, only to balloon into national scandals. By 2025, Ford's V8 troubles looked uncomfortably familiar. Reports of sudden engine failures, financial losses, and delayed recalls reached committee staffers, who began preparing questions. The House Committee on Energy and Commerce requested briefings on warranty claim volumes, while the Senate Transportation Subcommittee quietly reviewed complaints filed with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Talk of subpoenas surfaced, and whispers of public hearings circulated in the halls of Congress. The possibility of executives testifying under oath suddenly loomed over Ford's boardroom. For lawmakers, the issue was not only consumer safety, but also corporate accountability. Constituents stranded on highways or stuck with depreciating trucks created political pressure that no representative could ignore. The narrative of hardworking families betrayed by a trusted brand carried weight in districts where pickup trucks were cultural icons. Ford now faced scrutiny on 3 fronts: the marketplace, the courtroom, and the halls of Congress. What began as murmurs in service bays had become a national controversy, and the next stage would test not only the engines, but also the companies to withstand political fire. As Part 4 begins, rivals, workers, and consumers would seize on Ford's weakness, ensuring the fallout spread far beyond Detroit. Rivals rally? Competition in the truck market has always been fierce, but Ford's missteps created a rare opening that rivals were eager to exploit. Ram launched campaigns highlighting the proven durability of its Hemi engines, promising long-haul confidence at a time when Ford customers were questioning every oil change. Toyota rolled out ads for its redesigned Tundra, emphasizing engineering integrity and a reputation for reliability that stretched back decades. Even General Motors, still nursing its own V8 recall headaches, took subtle jabs by reminding buyers of expanded warranties and rigorous testing. The strategy worked. Fleet buyers in Texas and Oklahoma began shifting orders away from Ford, citing downtime risks and resale value concerns. Contractors who once purchased 10 or 20 F-Series trucks at a time started splitting orders, hedging with Ram or Toyota to protect against potential losses. For individual buyers, the messaging struck an emotional chord. Why gamble with a ticking question mark when other brands promised stability? Ford had long claimed dominance in America's truck wars, but the scandal weakened its fortress. Rivals painted themselves as the guardians of tradition, defenders of durability, and protectors of customer trust. By turning Ford's stumble into their rallying cry, they captured not only market share, but also the loyalty of disillusioned drivers. Yet while competitors pressed their advantage, Another fight was brewing not on showroom floors but behind factory walls. You've seen how deep this scandal runs, but we're not finished. The next revelations are already unfolding, and you don't want to miss them. Subscribe right now, because the only way to stay ahead is to catch the truth first. Factory friction. On the assembly line, workers felt the scandal in ways statistics could never capture. Morale dipped as angry headlines spread, and union meetings turned tense with demands for answers. Employees who had once worn Ford gear with pride now faced neighbors who asked whether the trucks rolling out of Detroit could be trusted. Inside plants, overtime surged as management pressed to handle recalls and backlogs. Yet quality concerns lingered. Some workers complained that speed was valued over precision, creating the very conditions that had sparked the crisis in the first place. Unions voiced frustration at being caught in the middle. They argued that labor had raised concerns about machining tolerances and production shortcuts long before the scandal broke. When engines failed, it was not executives who faced the wrath of customers, but the men and women who built the trucks. Shop floor debates grew sharper, and picket lines loomed as contract negotiations approached. The factory floor became a mirror of the larger conflict, a company trying to defend profits, a workforce demanding accountability, and a product caught between them. Where once Ford's plants symbolized strength and unity, they now embodied tension and doubt. That strain extended outward, forcing not only workers but also owners to rethink how they could protect themselves in a market where trust had been fractured. Buyer's shield. For consumers, the scandal turned ownership into a defensive game. No longer could a truck be assumed reliable by default. Now every driver needed a toolkit for protection. Oil consumption tests became routine, with owners documenting every quart added and every dipstick reading. Some kept detailed logs, complete with mileage and dates, ready to present to dealers or attorneys. Others invested in independent inspections, photographing cam journals, bearings, and oil pans to create evidence before a failure occurred. Warranty strategies became part of the conversation as well. Owners weighed the cost of extended coverage against the risk of catastrophic engine failure. Forums traded advice on how to push for goodwill repairs, how to escalate claims to regional managers, and how to prepare paperwork for possible class action settlements. The old assumption that a Ford truck would hold its value and carry its owner through thick and thin was replaced by caution and contingency planning. This defensive posture revealed the true damage of the scandal. Customers were no longer simply drivers. They were record keepers, negotiators, and amateur mechanics guarding themselves against the company they once trusted. And while individuals scrambled for protection, the broader cultural meaning of Ford's V8 engines came under question, forcing a reckoning far larger than any single repair bill. The legacy test. Ford's V8 engines were never just machines. They were cultural icons. For generations, the rumble of a Ford truck symbolized strength, reliability, and American grit. But the scandal fractured that mythology. If an engine could consume quarts of oil within months, if a proud owner could be told a metallic tick was normal, then what did the legacy of toughness really mean? The betrayal was not simply mechanical. It was emotional. Communities that had once treated Ford ownership as a badge of honor now debated alternatives. Truck forums, once havens of brand loyalty, became arenas of skepticism where buyers questioned whether tradition was worth the risk. The scandal revealed that trust, once broken, is harder to repair than any engine block. Even if Ford eventually delivers fixes, the memory of failure will linger in resale markets, in family stories, and in the identity of rural and working-class communities who depended on their trucks. The legacy test is simple, yet brutal. Does Ford still represent durability, or has that mantle been handed to rivals? Gas-powered loyalty itself hangs in the balance. For decades, the V8 was the unshakable foundation of truck culture. Now it is a contested symbol, its future uncertain. And as the dust settles, Ford must confront not only angry customers, but also the possibility that its most celebrated legacy has been permanently scarred. You've now seen how far this scandal goes. Owners betrayed, wallets drained, and trust shattered. But this is only the beginning. More stories are breaking, and the next chapter could hit even closer to home. Don't walk away thinking someone else will sound the alarm. Your voice matters here. Drop a comment with your take, hit like so this truth spreads faster, and subscribe right now so you never get left in the dark. Because when the next piece drops, you'll want to be the first to know and not the last to react.